Good morning. I've completed a series on Morphy at the First American Congress, Fisher at the 1963-64 US Championships, Carlson at the Pearl Springs, Caruana at the Sinkfield Cup, and Gukesh at last year's Olympiad. I think most people would agree those are the best chess performances of all time. I'm not going to get into a discussion about which I think was best. I think it's very difficult to compare them actually for various reasons. But at the same time, on the Norwegian side of the channel, I've been looking at, I'll just get rid of this. I've been looking at games from the early World Championships. I'm up to World Championship number 4. And to do things a bit differently, I'm going to do it the other way around. On the English side, I'm going to start with the latest World Championship. So on the Norwegian side, I'm up to 1892, Steinitz Chigor in the rematch. And here I'll take the most recent World Championship between Gukesh Ding and Ding Liren. I'm only going to be looking at the wins. And at some point in time, the two channels are going to catch up with one another. But I don't know, but I'm guessing that there was more wins in the first 4 World Championships than in the first World Championship, than in the last 3. So yeah, I might get there sooner than later. Does this mean that chess isn't as good or exciting as it was then? No, it just means chess is at a higher level. Nobody knows for certain. You can't work it all out, but most people have good reason to suspect that chess, played perfectly by both sides, is a draw. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. So if chess is played well by both players, as well as humanly possible by both players, then it's going to be a draw. That wasn't necessarily the case in the match between Gukesh and Ding. I was worried before this World Championship started. I was worried particularly for Ding, who had been having a really bad time, and I'd struggling to win games since he became world champion. Really, really difficult time for him. And I thought, there's a big danger from Gukesh here, who was in the ascendancy after quite surprisingly winning the candidates. He then produced that fantastic performance at the candidates tournament, and just a few weeks later, on November 25th, they started the World Championship. And here is the first game. Gukesh has the white pieces and Ding has the black pieces. And let's see what happened. So, e4, e6, French defence. This is a tough nut to crack. d5, of course, invite a man to take the whole centre is going to do it, but this is part of Black's plan. Black's plan is, you establish a big centre and I'm going to attack it and break it down. So White develops a piece and defends this pawn. Black could then play his bishop here and pin the pawn, but instead he develops another piece to attack the pawn. And this is then attack with the pawn. This is called the French defence classical Steinitz variation, after Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world chess champion, and who is still the man I'm looking at in my Norwegian series, because he was still world champion in 1892. So knight goes to d7. Immediately, c5 sticks out as a way to break down this structure immediately. In which case, this pawn on e5, this overextended pawn, as Black will claim, will be weak and difficult to defend. Yeah, he gets the defense of d5 in quickly. I like this system myself. I've gone away from playing the classical variation of the French defence. So, well, this season I've gone away from playing e4 altogether, but I like now the two knights. But in the past, I have played this system. So the knight gets attacked, and having already moved the f pawn, it means that the knight from c3 can come to e2 to defend both of these pawns, and then white has the possibility of playing knight to e3, pawn to c3, and bishop to e3, and then he would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 defenders on that pawn, and black could get another knight to attack it, a bishop, and a queen to attack it. So you could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5 against 5. You can't take first. You end up losing something at the end, because if you take first, everything just gets swapped off and you lose. And white could actually further play queen to d2 and the rook to d1 to make the defence even more solid. Of course, he's given his light squared bishop a great deal of trouble, but look at this light squared bishop for black. The well-known French light squared bishop, which has real trouble participating in the game. But let's see what happens. Nothing's decided at the minute. The evaluation is probably just a line of zeros. The knight comes to c6, another attacker on the d4 pawn. Everything at the minute is directed towards d4. And he supports with the pawn. That's great. He also gives his queen another route to defend the pawn. He can come to a4 to defend the pawn. Bishop, knight, rook here. Yeah, it's a good move. a5. Yeah. Obviously, Ding Liren was at this moment in time World Chess Championship, and he is a fantastic grandmaster, even though he might be having difficulties at this time in his life. A fantastic chess player, Ding Liren. I'm not going to argue with him and say that I know better. Of course I don't, but I like, and I'm used to, queen b6 here. And I think that is probably one of the reasons why he's doing this, because people are used to queen b6. He wants to have something a bit unusual. a5 might not be the top choice of the machine. I don't know. I'm not interested. But it's going to be in the top 3, 4, 5, and it's a good move, but it's different. It's difficult. And this is often what the World Championship is about, finding something difficult, unexpected, not necessarily the best move, but a good move anyway that your opponent's not going to be prepared for, so that they have to use up all their time trying to think what differences this makes to the position. So a5, good move, even though I wouldn't play it, disagree with it. So the knight comes, as I said, he's getting in a position where he can have the knight, the bishop, the queen, and also in this position it's possible for him, with only two attackers against the pawn, it's possible potentially for him to move the knight, develop the bishop here, and then, because the bishop can't get chased away, if he comes with a queen he can play bishop here, and then eventually bishop here, queen here, rook here, castle, and he's got a fantastic defensive setup with the bishop on e3. So the pawn comes a little step nearer. Okay, so his idea, this pawn chain, when your opponent establishes a pawn chain, the two most approved methods of attacking that pawn chain is either to attack the head of the pawn chain, this pawn, or the base of the pawn chain, this pawn. Here, Ding attacks the middle of the pawn chain and is in a position to start thinking about attacking the base of the pawn chain with a3. So bishop comes to d3 to support the pawn and to give him a little bit more development. Yeah, he develops his bishop as well. g4, bold move. Often in games we get in a position where our opponents have an attack on a different side of the board to us. Happens most commonly and most effectively when the kings are castled on opposite sides. Nobody's castling queenside in this position. But if you look at the black pawn chain, these pawns point in this direction. So it will be on this side of the board that the attack comes. White's pawn chain points in this direction, so it will be on this side of the board that white's attack comes. But g4 is a serious weakening of his king's position. But okay, we'll just see what's happening. The other advantage is that when black attacks on the queen side, he isn't attacking the opponent's king's position, and when white attacks on the king side, he will be attacking the opponent's queen side's position. This might make a difference. This might make white's attack more effective. So the queen comes to a5, so switching sides. So there's a bit of probing on both sides from Ding here, which is always good. You know, if you get the opportunity to annoy your opponent on one side of the board, do it. If you get the opportunity to annoy your opponent at the same time on the other side of the board, this is the kind of pressure which produces cracks. So very good move from Ding. And the bishop comes out, so he's moved the pawn to here to aid his attack, and so that he can castle long. And also then he will have a square to retreat his bishop to if it gets attacked. So the pawn comes, as we discussed, to a3. And now he's threatening to take this pawn and then take this pawn with the queen. It's defended by the knight at the moment, but that's his threat to break the pawn chain. So he plays b3, weakening not just this pawn, but the whole chain dependent upon it. So he takes with the c pawn whilst he can't take back with the pawn because the pawn is pinned to the king. So he attacks the queen first, so that he can then, if the queen goes here, okay, he's going to take with the pawn, but the queen is more likely to go here. He can then take with the pawn if he likes, but the pawn is now defending the pawn on b5, so we'll have to see. So yeah, but he takes one attacker away from his pawn chain, and the knight comes to d5 to win the pawn back. d4, sorry, to win the pawn back. Well defended. The knight comes to b6. He isn't in any hurry to castle, isn't Ding? But as we can see, there isn't another way to get safe on the king side than castling, so it's coming. So white castles, and the knight comes to c4, attacking the bishop. Yeah, just, you know, saying what are you going to do about that? And the bishop has, as I said before, got the choice of coming to f2. Bishop comes to d7, and black's one move away from castling. He can, in theory, castle long, but you'd have to be crazy to do that. But he's one move away from castling, and when he castles, his development is complete. All his minor pieces are out. His king's castled into relative safety, and the rooks will be able to see one another. Gukesh just needs to move his queen, and then his kings will be able to see one another. But you would expect Gukesh to be a move ahead in development since he started first. So in these 16 moves, where this tense, somewhat crazy, not crazy in that this is madness, this is wrong, crazy in that there's so much that can happen, chaotic, we can say, this chaotic situation. Neither of them have lost the tempo in this, so really good, dedicated to the square d4 play from both players. So the queen comes to e2, and black is indeed finished with his development. Black can castle now, not a problem. But he takes the knight first in order to undermine this pawn here. So he can't take with the pawn because then the pawn here falls. So he can take with the knight, or he can take with the bishop. and he chooses to take with the knight. The reason he chooses to take with the knight is that otherwise bishop here to b5 would come with a significant threat. But he carries out that threat anyway without playing the bishop first to c5, b5, because he plays the knight because it would be taken. He plays the knight to b2, you know, giving away the possibility of doing that exposure. And the knight seems a bit stupid out on the d4 square. It really does seem a bit. It gives white black good control over this open c file. The knight's perfectly safe there, and Gukesh can play his rook here, castle, move his queen to another square, triple up on this pawn and win it before Gukesh manages to get enough defenders to it. At least that's his theory. So the queen comes to e3, where it's defending this pawn and this pawn. The two bases of the pawn chain's been split in two now. These two small pawn chains. The two bases are here and here. On e3, the queen defends those two bases. The rook comes to c8, so he's got two attackers on this pawn. So the rook has to come to c1 to defend it. The queen comes to c4, and now the plan of playing rook to e7, rook to c7, castling, and rook to c1 looks reasonable. He's also threatening the pawn on a2. And yeah, he's no choice. He's got to push forward with his plan of attacking on the king side. But Ding's plan was never to win the a pawn. You know, if he'd won the a pawn, the rook comes here, chases the queen away, and then how do you defend this pawn? So that dissolves the queenside situation. And when this pawn is threatened, of course, the knight is then exposed. So no, his idea is to swap the queens off. Gukesh says no thanks, and the bishop attacks the rook. The rook comes to c2, so yeah, where it is attacked by the queen and only defended by the knight. So there are possibilities now to play pawn takes here, and if pawn takes, bishop takes, and if takes with the bishop, the rook falls. But instead, a clever move from Ding. He stabilizes the situation. He makes sure that that pawn isn't going to advance to c4. All of black's pressure against that pawn on c3 will disappear if that pawn is on c4. So the move c4, rook to c4, stabilizes it there and keeps that pressure up. So if you get the opportunity to play these kind of moves, where you stop the movement of your opponent's pieces, officially known as a blockade, it can be very useful to build up forces against that blockaded pawn. In his fantastic book, Die Blockade, The Blockade, Aaron Nimzowitsch outlined the principles where he said, blockade, surround, attack, win, something like that. So you blockade the pawn, then you surround the pawn, then you attack the pawn, then you win the pawn. Very simple. Hold it in place, bring your forces to bear on it, and win the pawn you're blockading. Okay, so the bishop is attacked. Might have trouble finding a good square, but I'll point out this king. Okay, there's two bishops there. Those are in good defensive positions, but it is fairly naked. But you could say, well, yeah, but look, when he takes this pawn, the black king is going to be subject to attack. Yeah, possibly. So the queen comes to b1, so that he's threatening to move the rook here and threaten the queen, or move the rook here and threaten the queen. Actually, yeah. Yep. So the pawn is taken and a rook is swapped, and white now has 6 pawns against 6 pawns. 7 pawns. So white's a pawn down at this point in time. And he takes the pawn, and yeah, the king is exposed to some attack there. The knight attacks the queen and the bishop, but he takes the pawn and defends the queen, and now he's got 6 pawns against 4, 2 pawns up. It's taken and taken back. Open file. He's not got castled now. When the bishop moves, well then it's going to be impossible for black to get castled, because he would have to castle through check. But he moves his queen first. I think he's got to move his queen for some reason. And the queen comes to c4, and he says, yeah, okay, let's swap queens off. Because if they swap queens off, then the fact that black isn't castled is irrelevant. He can develop his rook by playing king to e7. No, he's not willing to do a queen swap, so he takes the opportunity, whilst he's got it, to castle. And now, which king would you rather have? This pawn is under attack. You know, this pawn is quite weak. The king is really exposed. Black's king is relatively more safer, and Ding is 2 pawns up. So the bishop comes to d4. Great. Long diagonal. Attack this square and bring his rook into play. Ding plays knight. He's happy to have the swap off. He's 2 pawns up. He's happy to swap off everything that it's possible to swap off. Queen comes to e3 and the rook comes to f1 check. Are there good possibilities of a discovered check if the king takes? Yeah, there are. So he takes with the bishop. Wait a minute, doesn't this now pin the knight? Oh, he comes to e5. And yeah, but he can take the pawn anyway, and he does take the pawn. But of course, as I pointed out before, this pawn is hanging. This gives Ding the chance to take the pawn, c check, and escape. Now, if he just plays knight takes bishop, then Gukesh can play queen takes knight, but then we're not in an opposite coloured opposite coloured bishop's endgame. We're in the same coloured bishop's endgame. And with best play, if you're in an endgame with same coloured bishops, the player with the most pawns will generally win. And Gukesh has 5 against 3, so he's still 2 pawns up. Anyway, he blocks the check with the bishop, and the bishop defends the knight, but also threatens to come here. Bishop comes to g3 so that this bishop isn't any longer pinned. Gukesh says, I'm not bothered about that pin, I'm bothered about swaps. So the king comes to h2, and Ding makes himself a little escape square for his queen. Smart. For his king, sorry. And the bishop is attacked. The bishop attacks the queen. Queen comes to d1, instantly threatening mate here. Nice response. So the bishop has to move. He can't come here, the square he would most like, because then he just gets taken with the knight. And now queen here to h1 isn't any longer mate because he's given himself the escape square. But he doesn't check on h1. Of course he checks on c2. And the king comes to g3 and he takes the pawn on a2. And now he's got 5 pawns against 2. He's 3 pawns up. They've got just as many pieces. And you might think he's got the bishop pair and it's an open board. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This knight and bishop are just as effective as the 2 bishops in this situation. And if black manages to swap off the light coloured bishops, then he's got a bishop against knight. Alright, if he manages to swap off the dark coloured bishops, but he can't. So, if we manage to swap off this bishop, then we would have a situation where black would have a queen and knight against queen and bishop, and a queen and knight are better. than a queen and bishop, because a queen and knight can cover all colours of squares, whereas a bishop covers only one colour of squares. So whichever colour the bishop goes on, the bishop covers those squares, the queen has to take all the other squares. The knight and the queen can swap around what they do, and also they work really effectively together. So he plays e6 check, and the king goes to h8, and Gukesh has seen enough. He's 6 pawns down. He's 6 pawns, 5 pawns against 2, 3 pawns down. He doesn't have an attack. He's under attack himself. He's going to struggle to prevent mate from happening in this situation. It's just, nothing to play for here. And so I was really pleased because Ding played a very, very good game in the first game, and he won a game of chess. So, whatever happened, it was going to be a decent match. It wasn't just going to be mental collapse from Ding, which I didn't want to see. You don't want to see the World Championship being decided by a mental collapse by one of the players. Yeah, I think I'll just check it. It says it went a long time. Oh no. He quickly. Yeah, I won't say more. I don't want to spoil the fun that's coming. So yeah, this is the latest World Championship, played in 2024 in November. It was played in Singapore, which is probably a little bit nearer to home for Ding, but not so far away from Gukesh either. Okay, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.